Joining me now is the foreign editor at The Australian, Greg Sheridan. Greg, great to chat as always. The Assistant Defence Minister, Matt Thistlethwaite, was on the program a bit earlier this hour. He said that the government hasn't made a decision yet. It's still considering this request from the United States. Should they say yes? Should we send a naval vessel to be a part of that coalition in the Red Sea?
Yes, Kieran, fantastic to be with you. Look, I think this is quite an important moment in Australian history. If our Navy has reached such a pathetic state of incapability that it cannot deal with attacks by Houthi rebels using cheap drones, then we're just kidding ourselves about having any impact on China or the Indo-Pacific whatsoever. What we're saying then is that our ships are diplomatic symbols. They have no military capability at all. Now, it's well known one of the Anzacs is in dry dock because we can't crew the ships. The size of the ADF has gone down under the Albanese government because they can't recruit or retain people. I think because they have no clear or coherent idea of what their mission is. And if, on the other hand, we are capable of sending a ship but are choosing not to, well, that's kind of barking mad, because the whole basis of AUKUS is that the US will deploy something like 10% of its nuclear fleet in Australia, and that Britain will send its most precious military asset, nuclear submarines, all the way from Europe to defend us, but we cannot spare one pitiful ship to contain Houthi rebels firing drones off the coast of Yemen. Now, I think this is both a shocking moment, both in what it says about the Albanese government's complete lack of seriousness in this matter, the shocking state of our Navy, and the inability of the government to produce any military capability at all.
The conflict in Gaza, it continues. The pressure internationally remains. Australia, a part of that UN resolution last week calling for a ceasefire. A precarious few months ahead. It's been a difficult conclusion to 2023 for the region, but there is the risk that this extends further into Lebanon in 2024, Greg.
Yeah, so an Australian note to start, Kieran. The whole thrust of our actions over the last few weeks has been shocking drift away from our allies and friends. We've been mealy-mouthed and extraordinarily weak in standing with Israel. Unlike Britain and unlike America, we supported this unbalanced United Nations resolution. We haven't sent a senior minister to express any solidarity with Israel. And now we're not going to send a ship, so it would seem, to uphold commercial shipping in the Red Sea. My guess on the Lebanon front would be that Israel won't invade unless it absolutely has to, because it's already lost, according to my information, some hundreds of soldiers in Gaza, and Hezbollah is a more formidable force than Hamas. I don't think Israel wants to be fighting Hamas and Hezbollah at the same time, and that would tend to invite Iranian intervention. Also, it would be very bloody. I mean, all the problems you're having with the unintended death of civilians in Gaza, you would have in southern Lebanon. It does, though, offer this reflection. You know, Israel used to run a regime in southern Lebanon with the South Lebanon Army, and the hostile forces were north of the Litani River, and Israel had support from the local people of the South Lebanon Army. Under international pressure, it pulled out, and now Hezbollah totally dominates that space. I think what Israel's doing here is it's signalling Hezbollah that if it goes beyond a certain point, it will act. It will act if it has to. But I don't think it wants to go into southern Lebanon if it can avoid it.
Indeed, and certainly not as it's trying to finish the job on Hamas. Let's look back at 2023. What were the key moments of the year in international and foreign policy terms?
Well, I think the biggest moment, obviously, was this Hamas attack on the Israeli civilians. It was the most savage and sadistic and depraved act of terrorism we've seen in recent times, as bad as ISIS or Al-Qaeda. I would say probably a bit worse. in the studied degradation of women and the studied sadism with children and so on. And what has been very shocking has been the failure of the international progressive forces to condemn Hamas. So Joe Biden is a stellar exception there. I mean, he's an old-style Democrat. He hasn't been to Harvard, so he can work out that when there's a fight between a terrorist death cult and a liberal democracy, you choose the liberal democracy. And but I think it's been a fairly bad year for the West. Tremendous drift in Australia in strategic policy. The government's doing nothing and paying no price for it. We did get the AUKUS legislation passed in Congress, but nothing happens on that for years and years and years yet. And now we're heading for a Biden-Trump contest next year, and both of them would be terrible for Australia and for the world.
So you've touched on that, the election. That's one major point to watch out for in 2024. Obviously, we'll be right across that throughout the year. Is there anything else looming for the new year in a foreign policy strategic sense that we should have on our radar?
Well, a few things. Obviously, Israel is going to finish up this Gaza operation one way or another. We have to see then what happens after that. Kim Beazley once said to me in conversation, which year is China most likely to take action against Taiwan? The answer is next year, and he'll say that every year for 8 years, and then the answer will be never. And what he means by that is that the Chinese probably recognise that in a decade's time, Taiwan will have the military capabilities and their own society will be ageing and not growing fast economically. So they feel that they have a window of opportunity against Taiwan quite soon. They see Biden as feeble and the US in decline and Trump as biddable. So I think we're going, there's a very high danger that we see more aggressive Chinese action next year. The Albanese government has also become extremely feeble on China now, and the Chinese are being extremely assertive. And then finally, the other thing, obviously, that's going to be a big deal next year is Western support for Ukraine seems to be in decline.
Yeah.
Biden cannot come to an agreement with the Republicans in Congress to secure aid for Ukraine. There is a veto on European aid to Ukraine exercised by Hungary's Viktor Orban. I expect both those aid packages will eventually clear the hurdle, but what we've done with Ukraine is give them just enough weapons to make sure they never suffer defeat, but not enough weapons to get the job done. And in doing that, we've assisted Putin, because a long war, which becomes one of attrition, is the sort of war that Russia always wins. Russia always does very badly at the start of a war when it's incompetent and its logistics are terrible, but then it just wins through endurance because of its size. So I think we could see a very difficult year in Ukraine ahead as well.
Greg Sheridan, thank you for today and, in fact, for the contributions throughout the whole year. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
It's always great to be with you, Kieran. You're the ace of professionals, and God bless Sky News, and look forward to talking to you next year.
Very much so, my friend. We'll chat to you then.